how to make sourdough rye bread. I'm gonna start by making a rye flour sourdough starter. So what I'm gonna be doing is using my current white strong bread flour sourdough starter and use a couple of spoon of that and mix with the whole meal rye flour and water and leave it for a couple of hours to turn into fermented brand new sourdough starter. That way you can convert any kind of sourdough starter into different flour dough starter within a couple of hours. In a clean bowl, I'm gonna add a couple of spoons of my current sourdough starter, and then I'm gonna add about 100 grams of rye flour and a bit of a warm water. It doesn't have to be warm water. Again, I'm actually not measuring, I'm just adding all the ingredients by eye, and I'm looking for this thick pancake batter consistency. If you notice, rye flour is so much darker than a white strong bread flour, and that's because it's much less processed. And so that's pretty much it. It's not runny, it's not particularly thick. I'm happy with it. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna get this covered and leave it for about 4 to 6 hours uh, on my worktop and then to ferment. And then I'm gonna come back and check if there's bubbles and it looks ready. So as you can see, after about 6 hours, I've checked and I can see bubbles on the sides of the dish, and that is a very good sign. Bubbly on the top as well. That's another good sign. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to do flow test to make sure that this sourdough starter floats, which it does. That means it's light enough, and now we can bake with it. So I'm getting another clean bowl and I'm gonna add all the ingredients and gonna start measuring and getting ready rye sourdough bread dough. So we've got 4 easy ingredients, and I'm gonna start by adding 100 grams of my recently made rye sourdough starter. It's nice and bubbly and light, and it looks a bit shiny, so it means it's got elasticity and gluten. Then I'm gonna add 500 grams of wholemeal rye flour. If you don't have wholemeal rye flour, you could just use any rye flour. The difference is mainly in the color. Then I'm gonna go ahead and add a 1 teaspoon of salt. I don't usually measure salt, just add by hand a pinch of it. Then we're gonna add 400 grams of warm water. Warm water will speed up fermentation and just make it easier. Rye flour, it's a little bit more difficult to work with, and warm water will definitely help. So now we're going to mix all 4 ingredients together. Mix it as well as you can. I'm mixing by hand. I've got Danish hook, but you can mix it with spoon. I wouldn't recommend mixing it with hand. It's a very sticky dough and it's quite hard to wash it off all the rye flour and the dough from your hands. Now that the dough is ready, is well mixed, we're gonna go ahead and do a little bit of kneading or kind of doing some stretches and folds, which is not entirely in its true form when you work with rye sourdough dough. I'm gonna get a little bowl of water to dip my hands in it. And then I'm gonna start turning and working on a dough. Now, rye flour has a lack of gluten comparing to wheat flour, and therefore you can't do the normal kneading or stretches and folds that you would usually be able to do with that wheat flour. So, what I'm doing is I'm trying to do my best with what I have, and I'm kind of folding in back and forth. As you can see, there's no stretches. The dough breaks really easily. There isn't much work I'm able to do with it. So I'm going to turn around and create a little bowl, and that bowl will sit for quite a few hours before we're going to be able to go to the next step of making rice sourdough bread. So now I'm going to cover it with a cling film. You can cover it with towel or lid or anything else to make sure there's no bugs going to get in. And the top of the bread also won't get dry. Now we're gonna go ahead and leave this dough covered, sitting on the worktop for about an hour, and then we're gonna come back after 1 hour and to do some more kneading for this dough. After 1 hour gone past, we're gonna go back and do slight kneading, kind of stretches and folds for the dough. It has a little bit more volume and it seems to be a little bit more elastic, but again, there's still um I can still tell there's a lack of gluten. So we're just gonna try help the dough to develop just that little gluten that it has into a little bit more volume. More than anything, I'm trying to create a bowl, and as you can see, this stretches and folds even pretty much impossible with this dough. So my work here is done. There's not much more I can do. So I'm gonna cover that up, and then we're gonna leave it for a long fermentation. So I will leave this overnight, and we're gonna come back to it in about 12 hours. So after 12 hours, which was bulk fermentation overnight, as you can see, my dough has definitely doubled in volume. I can see loads of bubbles and lovely, like a stringy texture inside the dough, which it looks really, really good. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to get all the air that has developed in the dough doing bulk fermentation overnight, and then I'm gonna do final shaping of the dough. Again, I'm doing a tiny bit of kneading with my hands. The dough feels really sticky, but at the same time elastic, and the results for after bulk fermentation actually is pretty incredible. I'm not gonna lie, it's really uncomfortable to work with a doll like this. It's super sticky, but it's so worth that final result. Now I'm gonna go ahead and make the final shaping for the rye bread. I'm gonna use metal a bread tin and I'm gonna line up with a baking sheet. I usually make the baking sheet a bit wet and then crumble in my hands, and it's just easier to line up. Now I'm gonna transfer dough from my bowl into the tin. I'm not able to do much better shaping than this is because again there's a lack of gluten in the rye flour. So the best we can do is put the dough in a tin and kind of shape it tiny bits, and then this dough will have to just ferment and we'll take it from there. So with my dough scraper, I'm gonna make and try to even it off as much as I can the top of the dough, because what happens, anything that looks uneven, almost like a wavy dough on the top, that's when it's gonna be baked, is gonna become a very hard crumb, which is gonna be not particularly nice to eat. I've learned that hard way. So I'm gonna even that off, and that's gonna be a little bit more pleasant to eat once the bread is baked. Now I'm gonna cover the bread tin with dough with the cling film. I didn't show that in the video, but I ended up covering the inner part of the cling film with the rapeseed oil, just to make sure the dough, while is fermenting, wouldn't stick to the cling film. So after 8 or 9 hours later, after final proofing in the fridge, our dough is ready. So what you can, the yellow bit that you can see is the rapeseed oil that was just ended up sitting on the top, but you can see loads of bubbles. That means fermentation was actually quite successful. And now we just need to go ahead and bake this bread. I'm just gonna tap it off excess of rapeseed oil, and before I'm gonna put that in the oven. So we're gonna go ahead and bake this bread for 50 minutes. Whenever you made your bread, let the bread completely to cool down. To be fair, I always say the sourdough bread tastes better the next day. As you can see, the bread has not gone up in volume massively, and it doesn't even look that big of a loaf, but I promise you, once we cut the bread, we'll see the difference. So I'm gonna be cutting the bread off, and I'm gonna show you how the bread looks inside. You could tell this is a sourdough bread. Look at those beautiful bubbles inside the bread. It ended up being well fermented, and that's what rye sourdough bread needs, a long fermentation, which just makes which is almost easier to do. I hope you're going to enjoy the bread. It tastes absolutely delicious.